Alright, the new stator housing is now on and tightened up. The new voltage regulator has been mounted to the front of the battery box here, and it just worked out that there were two holes in the battery box that were perfectly aligned to mount this. Just unbelievable. So my little bracket that I made, I didn't have to use. Of course, here is the ground I'll run off of the voltage regulator on Ford cars back in the 60s, 70s. I always grounded the voltage regulator. It's always a good practice to have plenty of ground, even though you may not need it. You can't. Having a good ground is always a great advantage. I have the voltage regulator wired in. Of course, the yellow wires feed out of the stator. Then two of the leads will feed, one voltage feed feeds into this brown wire. A ground lead feeds here. Here's another ground coming out of the voltage regulator. This will go to the chassis. And then the other voltage feed will feed out where the original stator did. And this feeds into this wire that goes to the battery side of the starter solenoid. And this side, of course, will feed back the battery. So that's how the voltage gets from the regulator to the battery, is through this white wire feed here. Then this feeds back in the battery. Another thing I did was I installed automotive grade starter cable, especially since the starter on this bike is on the front of the engine and the voltage has to travel a long way. And of course, this was an 8 gauge wire. This is 4 gauge, so it's twice the capacity. And again, it's just one of those things, maybe I'm a bit funny about this and a little overkill, but you just can't have too much clean voltage going. And as far as the battery has to push, and the starter solenoid has to push this voltage, the starter seemed like it always dragged on this bike. Just, it never would spin the engine over very fast. So hopefully this will take care of that. I ran the cable around and routed it in the same place that the original cable. I did have to add a little more in these bends because the cable is heavier. Here and here, there's a little more of a bend. It runs underneath the crankcase, then comes out here. Of course, the cover that goes on here will cover all of this up, and it runs in this trough here, and then over to the other side of the starter solenoid. So we have all the wiring pretty much buttoned up. I'll get the new side cover. The side cover, I want to buff it. I'll put it on, get all of this finished up, and get ready to put the battery back in the bike. Then I want to add a voltage meter off the battery, and I'm going to mount the voltage meter right in here inside the fairing. It'll go right here. And I have that voltage meter here, and so I'll mount it in here in its bracket. There is just enough room to put it without hitting the top of the windshield. And this will run directly off the battery. So I'll have to run 2 large gauge wires, maybe 10 gauge wires, one from the negative, one from the positive. I'll bring it into the harness over here and feed it up through the fairing, and that'll give me a constant voltage on my battery, true voltage. And again, those are always good to have. It's good to know if your bike is not charging, and that way you won't be caught by surprise, and you can correct the problem in advance. It's one of the reasons why I've changed the stator on this bike, because I was running a voltage meter and it just wouldn't give me 12 volts. At 4,000 RPMs, it wouldn't give 12 volts. And so I knew that I had a problem with charging. So that's the 3-phase KZ1000 stator in the KZ750 twin housing. and of course the three-phase voltage regulator back here, and all of it now wired in, of course, with better grounds, and then the larger capacity battery cables.